Hello, my name is Marco from Culiacan. Let's learn together the memory verse from Lesson 4 found in Joshua chapter 10, verse 14. And there was no day like that before it or after it, that the Lord hearkened unto the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. God bless you.
The story of Israel before the walls of Jericho was not merely a tale of conquest but the visible revelation of an invisible conflict. Behind every military movement, every divine order, and every act of faith, a much greater spiritual battle was unfolding, the struggle between good and evil, between trust in God and human self-sufficiency. On the sands of the Jordan, on the walls of Jericho, and in the mountains of Canaan, not only was the destiny of a people being defined, but also the testimony of God's character before the universe. Throughout the week, we have seen how the spiritual conflict intertwines with human history. The commander of the Lord's army revealed to Joshua on Sunday reminded us that divine leadership does not submit to our human categories. On Monday, we saw that the visible war in Canaan reflected a far older war in heaven that began with Lucifer's rebellion. On Tuesday, we understood that God is a just warrior whose fight is born not of a desire to destroy but to restore justice. On Wednesday, we remembered that his original plan did not include human weapons or strategies. And on Thursday, we saw how, in his mercy, God adapted his approach to his people's unbelief, teaching them faith even amid battle. Every scene in this lesson reveals the same message: fights for his people, but he does so with a redemptive purpose. He does not delight in war but transforms it into an instrument of teaching. He shows that even in the midst of chaos, his loving character remains the center of the universal conflict. Welcome, my name is Augusto Palacios and this is Studying the Lesson. Friday, October 24th. The conflict behind all conflicts. Review. Joshua's encounter with the commander of the Lord's army marked a turning point in Israel's history. In that sacred moment, Joshua discovered that the real question was not whether God was on his side but whether he was on God's side. This revelation changed the entire perspective of warfare. The conquest of Canaan was not a matter of human strategy but another chapter in the cosmic conflict between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. Joshua understood that the battles of the people were, in reality, earthly expressions of a spiritual war that began with Lucifer's rebellion. That truth becomes evident when studying the book of Revelation chapter 12 verses 7 to 9, where we are shown the origin of evil in heaven. Lucifer, the covering cherub, rebelled against God's government and drew a multitude of angels into his fall. The book of Isaiah chapter 14 and the book of Ezekiel chapter 20 reveal that his sin was pride, the desire to occupy God's place. Since then, all human history has been the stage of that same conflict. In Canaan, the true enemy was not the Canaanite people themselves but the idolatry and spiritual corruption they represented. What was at stake was not territory but the loyalty of the heart. In his justice, God allowed this conflict to be manifested in order to reveal his character to the universe. Israel's wars, far from being acts of conquest driven by ambition, were pedagogical acts of faith. Through them, God displayed his faithfulness and power. In every victory, the message was clear: the Lord is the true warrior. He fights not out of vengeance but out of redemption. He destroys not out of hatred but to preserve life. His war is holy because his cause is just. When Moses and the people of Israel stood before the Red Sea, God established his ideal model: the Lord will fight for you, and you will be still. Book of Exodus chapter 14 verse 14. In that scene, the only strategy was obedience. The people needed no swords or shields, only faith. However, as time went on, Israel's faith weakened. Their unbelief led them to take the fight into their own hands. What was meant to be a testimony of trust became a war of survival. God did not abandon them, but he had to guide them through an alternative method, the second best option. That second option, explained in Thursday's study, shows us a God who descends to the spiritual level of his people. Instead of imposing his ideal by force, he adapts his methods to their reality. He teaches them to depend on him even while holding a sword. Thus, each battle became an opportunity for faith. In the book of Exodus chapter 17, while Moses lifted his hands and Aaron and Hur supported him, Israel learned that victory depended on heaven. In the book of Joshua chapter 6, as they marched silently around Jericho, they discovered that obedience was more powerful than weapons. Throughout history, God has continued teaching his people the same lesson. Israel's visible war is a symbol of the invisible conflict we all face. Our battles are not against flesh and blood but against principalities and powers of evil. And, just as in Joshua's time, the power that gives us victory is not ours but that of the one who fights for us. Therefore, when we face trials, challenges, or spiritual attacks, the promise remains the same: the Lord will fight for you. This great cosmic conflict reaches its full resolution at the cross. There, the heavenly commander did not draw his sword but gave his life. In that apparent act of defeat, God conquered the most powerful enemy, sin. What was foreshadowed in Canaan with trumpets and collapsing walls was fulfilled at Calvary with a single cry: "It is finished." Since then, every spiritual victory we experience is an extension of that definitive triumph. We do not fight to win, we fight because we have already won in Christ. The lesson also reminds us that God's original plan never changed. His purpose was not for Israel to live by war but by trust. War was a temporary concession, but faith is an eternal principle. Every miracle, every divine intervention, every conquest was meant to point the people toward the promise of a future without conflict. That promise still stands for us. One day the Lord will not only fight for his people but will eradicate all evil forever. The war will end, and the universe will know a peace that will never be broken again. Today, as the church, we still live amid that same conflict. We do not raise swords, but we face ideologies, temptations, and spiritual pressures that seek to extinguish our faith. God invites us to fight, not with violence but with perseverance, prayer, and faithfulness. Our strength is not in our strategies but in his presence. When the heart learns to rest in him, even the mightiest walls begin to fall. In the final days, the spiritual conflict will reach its climax, and as in Joshua's time, only those who stand on the side of the heavenly commander will be safe. The final victory will not belong to the strong but to the faithful, not to the wise according to the world but to the obedient according to faith. For the same God who fought for Israel still fights for us, and his promise has not changed: "Surely I am with you always, even to the end of the world." Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and X. Sunday to Friday you'll find 2 daily questions posted at 2 p.m. and 8 p.m., designed to help us reinforce what we learn and open a space for dialogue. Your comments are very valuable and always enrich our study. Join the conversation and share your insights with our community.